Hello, this is Manuel Saldivar. This is a short demonstration of the Qualtrics survey software that's available to those of us that work for UTRGV. In order to access Qualtrics, first we have to go to my.utrgv and then log in. Now in my case, I've previously requested access to Qualtrics, so when I log into my.utrgv, in my applications section on the upper left of the screen, I have Qualtrics, which is this Q icon labeled surveys that is available. If you do not see Qualtrics or this surveys icon available, you will need to request access, which you can do by going to the ServiceNow icon, which should be available. Click on that. You'll be taken to the ServiceNow homepage. This is the university's system for submitting help requests to IT. You'll want to go, confusingly, not to get access, but rather to service request. Click on service request, fill out this form, and just be sure to specify under short description that you're requesting access to Qualtrics, and IT will be able to take care of that process for you. If for some reason you don't see a ServiceNow icon, you can contact the IT helpline by dialing 882-HELP or 665-HELP. But in our case, let's assume that you have gotten access to Qualtrics. I'm going to click on the Qualtrics icon. It'll take me to a separate window. After I'm logged in, you'll arrive at your work page, which is divided into this navigation menu on the left-hand side and the surveys, the questionnaires that exist within a certain folder. In this case, I have a number of folders set up. Here are the folder names, and here are the number of surveys that exist. For example, this folder goes back to when I was with Florida State University, FSU, so I had some work I did there. When I was with BMed here at RGV, created some surveys, and now with UNIV, I have a number of questionnaires. So right now we're looking at my UNIV 1301 folder, just as one example. I could create a new folder. In fact, I'm going to do that. Let me just create a new folder. I'm going to call it test. So now I have a new folder. When I click on that, you'll see that the right-hand side of the screen now is empty because there are no items in this folder. So I'm going to create a simple questionnaire just to demonstrate. We start by clicking on the plus sign. You'll have this window pop up. You have a number of options available here. Basically, these are all prefabricated surveys that come complete with sample questions you can simply modify. For our purposes, though, I'm going to stick on this Research Core tab and just create a blank survey. I'm going to name it Demo of Qualtrics. I'm going to create a project. So now I've been taken into the new survey. But just to be clear about where we are within the system, I'm going to click on these 4 circles. This takes me back to the home menu where we just were. So again, I'm in my test folder, and within this test folder, I have, as of now, one survey, the demo of Qualtrics that I just created. You can see its status is new. It only has one question, which is the blank question that was included in 0 languages. I'm not going to go into the language issue, but these 2 bits of information are going to be key as you kind of keep track of the status of your survey. I'd also like to demonstrate or point out this downward-facing arrow here. If you click on that, you have a number of options that are available. Basically, all of these options are also accessible within the survey, which I'll demonstrate in a second. But for now, I'm just going to click on Edit Survey to be able to go back into the survey to work on it. I could also simply click on the title of the survey. And again, I'll end up within the new questionnaire I've created. Again, Demo of Qualtrics. You can see here, this is the first question that was created by default. It's just obviously a blank question, a multiple choice question. Let's say I want to go ahead and start my survey by asking my respondent to provide his or her email address. So they'd have to type something in. Obviously, with a multiple choice question, that's not really possible, so what do? As long as this question is highlighted or selected, and you can do that just by clicking anywhere around this box. You see how it became gray or a little darker than the background. As long as I'm selected, I'll have a menu pop up on the right-hand side of the screen. It lets me change question type. Right now, you see multiple choice is highlighted because that's the question type that this question is set to. But if I click on this downward-facing arrow, I'll get a small pop-up window that allows me to create a number of different kinds of questions. I won't go into every single one of these examples, but I will use 3 just to demonstrate. Number 1, these 2 that are labeled static content give you the opportunity to simply create a declarative statement, so to speak. It is not really a question. There's no interaction with the respondent. It's just a way for you to provide information if you need to have a large bit of text that's its own paragraph, so to speak. So let's say I'm going to do a descriptive question. So here you can see all I have to do is come back, click on the click to write question text, and I have this text box that appears. This is the normal view, which basically allows me to simply type information. I can also switch to HTML view if you know how to use HTML tags. I could use HTML tags to, for example, make my text bold. And when you see I go to normal view, this text has been bolded because of my use of the HTML tags. In any case, this kind of question, again, text graphic, has no interaction. This is just a way where I might include important instructions to the respondent. But let's say I'm going to keep that question. So then I want to add a new question. So I'll create a new question here. By default, again, I'll have a multiple choice question. Let's say I do want a multiple choice. So this is my first multiple choice question. Sorry, I misspelled that. Okay. So that's the question. Again, I have normal view, HTML view. I can choose between the 2 if I need to make any changes. I'm not going to talk about the rich content editor or pipe text in this video, but suffice to say there are many powerful options that are more advanced that you can work with if you need to. But this is my question for the multiple choice. So this is the item. These are the stems. So the first possible response is response 1. Then I have response 2. And then response 3. So here I've created a multiple choice question. Let's say I want to start breaking up my chunks of text here, so it's not too overwhelming. So the user is not scrolling infinitely long. I can highlight this question and then choose to add, by scrolling over here, a page break. And so this basically means if this questionnaire became live, the respondent would log in or be given the link to arrive to the survey. They would see 2 questions first in sequence, question 1, question 2, and then a page break, meaning this would be at the bottom of the screen, and then the next question, question 3, would appear on another screen. The respondent would see a little button at the bottom of their screen with a rightward facing arrow, and I'll demonstrate that in a second. But I also wanted to point out before I move along, this menu that lets me choose the question type, once I've entered content into the question, that content is retained even if I change a question type, which is handy if you decide, for example, let's say that instead of a multiple choice, I prefer to have a matrix table. So here you can see the content I entered here is retained, as is the content here, but this became a matrix where I can have folks choose a scale, agree, disagree, neither, or whatever. So this is just a handy way to have to avoid having a lot of retyping. You may start out wanting to have a multiple choice item, for example, and then decide, no, I think a matrix works better, or a true and false, or what have you. But in this case, I'm going to go back to multiple choice, which again goes back to what we had because all the data, all the entries are retained. You can see here, if I wanted to add items, I could just click on plus, and that's how I have a 4th choice or a 5th choice. Or if I decide, I think actually 3 choices is sufficient for this question, I can just hit the subtract button and I go back to my 3 choices. I can select a setup where the respondent can answer not or is required to not provide one response but multiple responses. So you see it went from a radio button, which is this symbol where you can only choose one at a time. If I choose multiple answer, it becomes a checkbox, so I can check multiple items if I want to. I can create a drop-down list. So here, this is good if you have a limited amount of space, or for other reasons want to have your responses not be visible all at once. I can even have a select box, which is where I can select my answer like this, or have, by holding down the control button, I can select multiple items if you want to set it that way. But again, I'm going to go back to just single answer. So here I've created a text-only question or item. Here I've created a multiple choice item. So I have a page break. Let's say question 3, I want to be text entry. So I'm going to choose that. So here again, I click to write the question text to create the text of my next question. And then this text box obviously is empty. So this is the place where your respondent would type in his or her response. By default, it's going to be a fairly long text box. If your question is asking for a smaller bit of information, or just you feel like for graphic design purposes this is kind of weird looking. If I'm asking someone to give me their email address, for example, I may not want my box to be quite this long. I can use this functionality here. I can move the cursor over, have the double arrows, left click and hold down the left click, and then drag it down. So this is probably sufficient for an email address. I should mention too, this text box length, the visible length, is independent of the content it accepts. It will accept hundreds of characters. So if I had a really long string of information, as you can see it's scrolling over, it'll still accept the information. It just might not necessarily show in the box if the box is shorter than the string of information that you're requesting. Now this is a single line text box. I could also have multiple lines if I needed to have more space. I could also have an essay box or create it as part of a form. So here for a form, let's say I'm asking for contact information because I'm soliciting data from respondents and I'm using it in a study, and I'm offering a gift card if a respondent completes my survey as a thank you for working on my research study. So here, this is a good way from a database perspective, instead of offering just one big text box where respondents would enter data just free form, which makes it kind of hard to manage on the back end. Here I can create a form and ask for their name, and then here you see actually it defaulted to it recognized that I was asking for a name, so the system is smart enough to assume, oh well, this is going to be a contact form, so it actually pre-populated all these fields for me. If I did not want all this information, I could click on one of these fields and then just remove the form field. I could also, of course, add a form field. So let's say I wanted to have one additional field. I can go up again to the menu on the right hand side and add a form field. This is been added back. You can add another one. Here's a blank opportunity. So let's say I want email address. And again, on the database, when this data set would be output, the information here would be the heading or the variable naming a column, and then whatever's entered by the respondent would be the data that are found in these text boxes. And again, these can be shrunk back and forth. Two other things I want to point out, and then I'll conclude. Number one, I won't go into a lot of detail about validation, but basically validation is the idea of having some kind of process for checking the integrity or the accuracy or the correctness of data that's entered in an item. For example, let's say I among the bits of information I'm asking for are postal code. Whatever someone's postal code or zip code is, I know that it is a numeric value, right? So, for example, in Bronzeville, the zip code is 78520. This data, this postal code entry, must be a numeric value. If someone were to enter 7852S, that's nonsensical. So I want to make sure the user is entering the data that I need to receive. So by doing that, what I could do here is enter a value and then enter a validation type. So this just means what kind of data am I actually looking for. So here, sorry, let me go back just to show what I did. So I have this question selected because it's grayed out. I go to validation type. I click on custom validation. I'm going to get this pop-up window. Again, it's reminding me, hey, we're talking about question 3, which is this question here. But question 3, because it has multiple text boxes, I have different opportunities to validate the data. Do I want to validate the address line, the city, the country? I'm going to select postal code, and here I can use Boolean operators to demonstrate that the postal code should equal or should contain or should display. Let's say I want it to be equal to 78520. This survey, I only want respondents from people that have a zip code in Bronzeville. So I can save that. Sorry, what I'm doing here is I can display an error message so that if someone types in a zip code other than this, I can have the system automatically tell them. In my case, I'm going to go to my own library, require response. So basically, if someone types something in that is not equal to 7520, they'll get an error message that says, hey, this requires a response. You've got to change your answer. Now, this is probably less common, but nonetheless, it can be a powerful functionality, so I want to point that out. The other thing I wanted to show is validation options in the sense of forced or non-forced response. So what this means is, let's say we're talking about, in the case of a quiz or a test, a series of multiple choice questions. Let's say you have 10 questions. You want to make sure that your student, in this case, the test taker, the quiz taker, is answering every question. You do not want them to be able to skip questions. So I would go back to, in this case, this multiple choice question, which is selected because it's grayed out. I can go down on the right-hand menu and choose force response. By checking that, and you see an asterisk appears here on this side of the question listing. By forcing a response, this means that when this quiz becomes live, the quiz taker, the test taker, must respond to every question. They must answer it some kind of way, or else they will not be able to proceed. In this example, if there were 2 questions on the screen, and then they would have to answer this question 2 before they could click on the right arrow that takes them to question 3. You can also request a response, which basically is the same idea, except the test taker or the quiz taker would receive an error message saying, please respond to this question. But if they persist in not responding, they could still move to the next page or the next item. Final thing I want to show, and this is especially for quizzes or tests, is the ability to let Qualtrics know how I want to score or grade all of these items. So in my example, let me go ahead and add one more question just to have 2. So this is my second choice, my second question. All right, I'm just going to have choices 1, 2, 3. So my quiz has 2 multiple choice items, 1 text statement, instructions, information, whatever, and then in conclusion, I'm asking for contact information. So obviously, this is all going to be free form, and this is not really a question. It's just a declarative statement. It's information, directions. But let's say I do want to score in some fashion. I want to automate the process of calculating or tallying up responses to these 2 questions. What do? I can go back up here to the menu at the top, click on Tools, click on Scoring, and I'll move to a whole new screen that is called the scoring screen. Leave all the defaults as they are for our purposes. There's a lot of functionality, a lot of available things you can do, but just at the simplest level, you will see on this scoring menu all your questions displayed. Now in my case, you remember the third question is the contact information. There's no scoring to be done there because it's all open response, free response. And the first question, there's no scoring because it's just a declarative statement, directions, information. But you see the two multiple choice questions appear, the question text as well as the possible responses. The idea here is I can indicate a value in this box, one of these boxes on the left-hand side, and that will be totaled up or summed up automatically by the database when the data are output. So let's say in the case of a quiz, there's one correct response that I want. So the correct response is item 2, and for this question, the correct response is 1. You see that they highlight green. So what I've done here is basically made every response equal 0 by default, or nothing, not, except for the correct response, and the correct response equals 1. So what would happen when this quiz is completed, when all the responses are output on a data set, on a spreadsheet, if you will, is there'll be a whole column showing responses to question 2. So this would be the variable or the title of the column on a spreadsheet, let's say. So imagine there's a vertical column of data here. Each row represents a response from an individual respondent, student, test taker. Anytime someone had not chosen the correct response, that column would include a 0. If it did include a correct response, in this case, let's say response 2, the column would include a 1. And so that way, I could, by going left to right, let's say each column represents a question, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I could have a column, in fact, I will have a column, Qualtrics will create it automatically, that sums up, totals up all of these responses. So I would know automatically student number 1 has a total score of, let's say, 2, because he or she had both correct answers. Student number 2 has a score of 1, or a 50, only one correct answer out of 2. Student number 3 has a 0, and so on and so forth. Now this is where I'm having a test or a quiz where there is one correct response I'm looking for. Let's say I was doing a questionnaire, like a psychometric questionnaire of some kind, and it wasn't a matter of grading, but rather of getting a response that's going to fit on a scale. So I might have a scale where response 1 equals a 3, response 2 equals a 2, response 1 equals a 1, because for this particular psychometric item, the highest value response, the most desirable response, whatever the criterion is, would be response 1, that would equal 3. Let's say for question 4, in this case, it's the scale is inverted, and so a response to selecting item 1 would result in a score of 1, item 2 would result in a score of 2, item 3 would be a score of 3. Again, the point is, you would still have the same output. You would have, and I'm visualizing here with a cursor, imagine a spreadsheet. The rows, again, are the responses from individuals. The columns are the variables, the questions. So for respondent number 1, if he selected 3, or response 1, that's 3 points, and response 2, that's 2 points, that would be total together to equal 5. And so this person's score on this fictional psychometric item questionnaire would be 5. Let's say respondent 2 selected 1, or response 3 for 1 point, and response 1 for 1 point. So that person's score would be calculated as a total of 2. And so on and so forth if you added additional items. Last 2 things, and then I will conclude. For distribution, so once you create a survey, how do you put it out? You click on distributions. You can either send an email through the Qualtrics system, which I won't cover it in this discussion, or get a single reusable link, which means you would have a link created by the system, a web address basically, which you could then provide to respondents or test takers by email, by giving them the web address manually, or however you want to do it. You can also create a link that's unique to each contact. This requires having to preload Qualtrics with a list of the individuals that need to receive a link by email. I will not cover that because it's a little more involved, but just FYI, that is a functionality that's available. And then finally, once you've gone through this whole process, how do you analyze your data? So you can click on Data and Analysis, and in this window you would be shown a grid, basically a spreadsheet if you will, that has all of your questions, all of your responses, in addition to some other data that are gathered by the system that you do not need to request. It's done automatically. For example, when did a respondent begin to answer the survey or the questionnaire? When did he or she complete it? How much time did they spend on the survey? Sometimes that's a variable that we can use for research purposes, even if it's not something that the user is cognizant that that's being tracked. Anyway, once these data are available here, you can then export. You can also import data if you want to pre-populate some fields, again, possibly for research purposes, but that's another discussion. In any case, and again, to get back to the home screen, always just go up to the upper left and click on these 4 colored circles. So this is a demonstration of Qualtrics. I hope this has been helpful for you. As an aside, I will note that Qualtrics is a major system. It's used by a lot of institutions for all kinds of research and survey and questionnaire-related purposes, not just in higher ed, but certainly in industry. If you want to get further into the capabilities of Qualtrics, I'm happy to help, but also just wanted to make you aware, if you just Google Qualtrics and a specific question like Qualtrics, how export data or whatever, you'll find a whole multitude of how-to videos on YouTube and how-to guides all over the internet. And then finally, by the way, since this is a logged-in system, in this case I'm logged in using my UTRGV credentials, I do want to log out when I am done working with it. That concludes my presentation. I hope that's been helpful for you.